We have an affiliation with that organization that's long-standing. I can tell you that Tom is an exemplary leader. He's someone who grew up in the flats in northeast Arkansas and spent some time in Pocahontas. My wife is from Pocahontas. She'll be pleased to know you're here, Tom. And was superintendent in Paragould, was superintendent of North Little Rock, was the executive director of the AAEA, and then became commissioner of education, all within the span of about, what, 6 years, something like that? So we're worried about whether...
Can't hold a job.
That's right. We're worried about whether he's going to stay there, but we're delighted he was able to find time, particularly during the busy legislative session, to be here and talk with us about public education. He comes as an alumnus of the University of Arkansas, although he got his doctorate at Arkansas State, and we've forgiven him that a long time ago. He was quite, I think, the acknowledgement of him as the director of the AAEA was probably a pinnacle of your career in many instances. As some of you know, Keller Nagel was the long-term director there, and there was a lot of speculation about who was going to replace him. And it's a distinct honor, I think, to be selected for that position, almost as much as an honor to be selected for the commissioner. So again, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Kimbrell. He has not told us what he's going to speak about, so all of us are going to be informed at the same time. It's delightful to have you here, and we look forward to your remarks. Thank you.
It's indeed a pleasure, and if you bear with me a minute, I'll tell you that story because he's exactly right, and I appreciate him saying that because sometimes I forget to mention that process. I call this my major league job. Some of you have heard me speak over the last year, have heard me tell that story about my 15-year-old son when I told him that I had met for the third time with the governor and had decided to do this. He teared up and I teared up, and he said, "You've got your major league job." One of these days, Reed, he thinks he's going to throw a baseball up there on the mound. I hope he does. That way I don't have to worry about retirement. But I think when I accepted and was offered the job at the association, it probably meant more to me because I have a family connection. When that organization was created back now 36 years ago, my dad was one of 7 who created that, with Dr. Nagel then being selected. And I'll never forget calling Dad and telling him that Dr. Nagel was retiring. And he said, "Oh my goodness, I never thought he would retire." He said, "I feel sorry for the guy that takes his place." And he said, "Who do you think it will be?" And I said, "Well, Dad, they offered me the job today." And he said, "Oh, you can do it." So I don't know. I had a good time working at it, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But thank you for allowing me to be a part of this. I'm a little more nervous today than I've been speaking in front of crowds that are a lot bigger than this. And I think it's because of the expectation that Gary's going to have of me to be able to speak intelligently and to talk, and some of the rest of you, and some of you I don't know. But I'm not a lecturer, and I'm not really an academic person. I'm just a school person, and that's all I've known all my life. But I do enjoy getting to come to the University of Arkansas. It does create a lot of fond memories for me. It reminds me of how long ago this journey began and the work started, and it really makes me appreciate the fact that I'm on the backside of my career. I sure don't want to think about having to start over again and go through a university study program with the expectations that many of you have for today's students. Don't know that I would have ever made it. When I was asked to be a part of this lecture series, I really tried really hard to think of reasons not to. And I think the reason I did that is I had and still have this fear of not being able to live up to the standards of those people who have come, and I've looked at the list and those that will come to speak to you about issues of education. As I said, I'm not an academician. I don't do a lot of study of theorizing about what we need to do. I just do the hands-on work of trying to educate today's children and try to think a little bit about the future. I'm really not a public speaker. I can hold my own in small groups. I can talk one-on-one. And I have a really good ability to make my kids do most of the things I want them to do in my house. Other than that, I'm not a great public speaker. But I told myself, okay, here's the reason you don't have to go. You can use the excuse that the legislature's in town. And then I decided, no, I need to do this. one, get myself out of my comfort zone, stand before people who have a great expectation of the person that's in a position that I'm in, and maybe what I do have to say is important. I don't know, I may be pulling myself there, but we'll see. So I'm here, and when I accepted, knowing up front that I wasn't going to come in here and tell you about the state of education in Arkansas, because if anybody knows the state of education in Arkansas, from looking around at the faces of the people I know in this room, you know what that state is. For those of you who don't know, I do want to remind you that, in case you haven't heard, Arkansas did get a very favorable ranking in Ed Week's quality counts with a rank of 6th in the nation. Now, I understand that there are issues that we have, and there are issues with the quality counts report, and I've read it from cover to cover. It's one of the few things that I've had the opportunity to read, and I got to do that as I sat in the airport at Munich for 18 hours trying to catch a plane back from Munich into Chicago so I could get home last weekend. But if you read each of those different categories, what I find interesting is that we have a tremendous amount of work to do in the area of student achievement. But what we have in place are areas that will lead to success for students. What they did find is that Arkansas has moved forward with its policies, with some of the things that we put into place over the last several years that will help our state be better capable of meeting the needs of tomorrow's learners. So although we know we have a lot of work ahead of us, and we acknowledge that that work in our state is going to be hard, thanks to the people who came before me in this position to lay the groundwork, to put the policies in place, to move the educational program in a direction that has given Arkansas at least some hope. I mean, it's always discouraging to read every report that you're 49th or you're 50th, to always use that old vernacular that thank God for Mississippi. So, you know, hope is an interesting thing. And with this, many times our people, especially our people who are in our struggling schools, begin to realize that there is hope, that there are things that can be done for today's children and tomorrow's future. So I'm just the lucky recipient of being here with good timing. When I leave here, whenever I leave here, 6 hours from now or 6 days or 6 years or whatever it may be in shambles. But I'm lucky to be a part of what I think is a progressive state and looking at how education needs to move forward. Today I want to come and share with you my thoughts and perspectives about my first year and a half. And I entitled this, Looking Back, Lessons Learned and Those in Waiting. It's helped me to reflect upon the work that seemed to only start yesterday. And I hope by sharing some of these perspectives and some of my thoughts, it'll help in two ways. One, help me move forward in the work that I have to do, the important work of educating tomorrow's kids, and help me prepare for those things that I call still in waiting, those areas of need that I have to address as a leader of education in our K-12 systems. And secondly, I hope that possibly it'll help you in your perspective, in your role as leaders in whatever area you're working in. So there are two things I hope that I can accomplish today in this short period of time that I'm going to visit with you. Now, I understand I have a certain amount of time, or should take a certain amount of time. I don't know how long it will take. But I also learned very quickly that the most learning comes in that give and take, the question and answers, because your questions give me more guidance about what I need to do and better acknowledge what I need to know about than for me to talk to you and tell you what I know. The answers that I give you hopefully will help you understand better where we're going and what we have in front of us. So I'm going to talk a little bit about those lessons learned, and then we're going to just kind of informally have a conversation. I think great learning happens when people communicate face-to-face and questions and answers are allowed. As Reed said, I was appointed by the governor into this position in September of 2009, approximately 16 months ago. Matter of fact, I started the same day that they started selling lottery tickets. Makes me wonder whether Ernie has learned any lessons or not. This occurred after the third meeting with the governor and the chief of staff, Merle Harriman. And the interesting story about that is when I left there the third time, I felt like Mr. Harriman had my arm behind my back twisted and the governor was kicking me in the shin. Because I'll be honest with you, this is not what I wanted to do at this point in time in my life. I have a 15-year-old and a 10-year-old, and they are my life. This is a difficult, time-consuming job. And I told the governor I wasn't ready. I wanted to do this eventually, but I wanted to do it at the very end of my career. This job may end my career. But I knew when I told the governor that day, I'll do this, that I had accepted the biggest challenge of my life. But I also told myself that I was going to continue to work towards what my goal had been since I had decided in 1982 on this campus to become an educator. When I changed my major and called back home to tell my parents I didn't want to go to pharmacy school, I didn't want to become a pharmacist, what I wanted to do is teach and coach. And Mother answered the phone and I said, Mom, this is what I want to do. And she quickly said, you'll need to tell your dad. I said, you tell him. She said, no, you tell him, and he's not here. I'll have him call you. Well, I waited for 2 days and never got a phone call. I thought, okay, she's told him and he's okay with it. I received a letter about 3 days later. Still have the letter, carry it in my Bible with me. The only letter that I'm not sure that anyone ever received from my dad that was handwritten. But it explained the importance of loving what you do. To not do what you want to do because it's a job, but to do what you want to do because it means something to you. So at that point I said, my job then will be to have the greatest impact on the greatest number of kids that I possibly can. So as I began a classroom teaching load of 149 kids, 5 different preparations in 5 different classrooms, coaching 3 different sports for the total of $15,600 in 1984, I thought I was in hog heaven. And I was. And from that point forward, a progression of trying to influence the education of the greatest number of kids have led from that 149 kids to 467,000 kids. So that challenge continues, and I am where I am 16 months later, the dog that caught the car. And I'm not sure exactly what I'm going to do with this car, but I'm going to do the best that I can to carry out the vision that the governor has set forth for me and the mission that I've set forth for my personal life. Now, every job that I've ever taken helped me to grow professionally and to learn continually. I think that's what life is about. When we quit learning, we quit growing, and we quit living. I've said it 100 times in the last 16 months. The most difficult job I've ever experienced in public schools was a high school principal's job. The most important job in public schools is the teaching job. The loneliest job is the superintendent's job. I'm here to tell you with all clarity, there is no way to even begin to compare this job with those. It's the most difficult thing I've ever imagined. Within a few days of accepting the announcement, I left my job as the director of the association. Mindful, you need to know, it was the best job in education. It was the most fun job I'd ever had. Well, the only other better job I could think of is Luke Gordy's job. But I moved to number 4 Capitol Mall and became the commissioner of education on that same day that they began to sell lottery tickets. And that's, as I reflected, when I understood lesson 1. Lesson 1, act quickly to build the right team. The staff that was in place at the Arkansas Department of Education had worked for previous directors and commissioners, some over 40 years. Matter of fact, my secretary had worked for 45 years there and continues to work there. She calls me her Sweet 16. Miss Dorothy, if you've ever called over there, is one of the kindest, most accommodating people in the world. And she's seen a lot of us come and go. And she says that she'll see this one probably come and go. My philosophy has always been that you begin those jobs and you don't create strife immediately. You begin to work through a process of working through groups and making change as you see need for change to occur. Begin At that point, I began to develop a process of trying to restructure how our current staff were operating. In hindsight, and at this point in time, that was my biggest mistake. I should have assessed at that time those people in the leadership roles, developed and understood what their strengths and their weaknesses were, and see how they fit, knowing what my strengths and weaknesses were. At that point, I should have quickly made decisions about who were the right people to be on my team. People that I could trust, people that were loyal, and people that were and had demonstrated ability to get the job done, that worked with passion and drive, the same passion and drive that moved me. That was a mistake. And it has slowed our work. It has stolen a lot of energy, and it was not fair to those people that I allowed to stay there who needed a new future. I should have focused at that point in time on the right fit for right now. I should have asked myself, who is it I need to work with me to help bring about the change that I want to see in the work of the agency? What I really failed to do was to imagine the Arkansas Department of Education as this wheel, with me as the hub. Now, I'm not being egotistical, and I don't mean to come across that way, but Buddy Allman, you're a bicycle guy, and there are probably some of the rest of you that are bicycle people. Well, if you know about bicycles, you know that every bicycle wheel has a number of spokes. Each one of those spokes works in unison to deliver the energy that's put forth by the pedal in contact with the road to move you forward. And when a spoke is out of line, untuned, it creates a wobbling of the wheel, which takes away energy. Well, that's what we had. Spokes in that wheel that were not, one, in tune, or two, may have even had parts missing. In this work of education, we can't afford to have weak spokes. And even those that were out of tune caused our wheel to wobble and to waste energy. So lessons learned, the right people, right now. But I'm proud to tell you that, and a bunch relieved, that over the last several months we've been able to make some change and some great progress in building what I call the right team. I'm going to continue to monitor and make adjustments to that team as we need change made. And it's vitally important that our team surround ourselves with people that have different skills, different philosophies, and yet are pulling in the same direction for the same purpose. If we don't, we can't move forward. Lesson 2, and probably the one that hurt me the most when I sat down and had to admit this. Quickly identify the key work. The whole point of leadership, and I've been through all kinds of leadership programs, and Debbie, I've been through y'all's, and I know this intuitively, but you have to identify what the key work is. I knew I wanted the Department of Education to improve its communications. I wanted to grow a relationship with superintendents and the school folks from the Department of Education's perspective. I had spent 4 years developing relationships across the state with school folks as the director of the association, but yet now in a different role, I would be seen as a different person. Many people had said I'd gone to the dark side. I called it the shadows. Luke and his group are in the dark. We wanted to move the Department of Education from one of being seen as a really heavy-handed oversight agency to one providing services and technical assistance. And quite frankly, making that shift has cost an enormous amount of time and energy. The first year, and I've gone back and looked at my calendar, I averaged 2 days a week out of the office across the state in school districts, communities, and co-ops. The problem with that, and I loved every minute of it, I loved being out. The problem was I didn't have the right team in place. And I failed to set time aside to encourage and inform the staff and the team what my plan was and to strategize about the future. So subsequently, I've realized I didn't have the right folks on board, and I did not develop the key work for people to understand. Now, I'll tell you, I had a plan and a vision, and I can see it in my head. And interestingly enough, I had conversation with Gary today about something that popped into my mind a week or so ago. And Gary, you may not want to admit this, but most people can't see my vision. You did. You may want to rethink that and say, well, no, that's not the way I understood it. But I have a very difficult time of communicating what I see for the future of education and verbalize that. I know it when I see it. It's like good teaching. I can't put it down on paper what good teaching is, but when I see it, I know it. Well, I see what the vision is, and I have not done a very good job of communicating that vision for the people who work with me and the people that I work for. So I have to work on that, and we're getting better. One of the things that we're going to do is many times when you're not very good at these kinds of things, you ask for help. We have now received a grant that will allow us to work with the chief state school officers in assessing what we're doing at the department from a leadership capacity and the delivery of services as a state educational agency. They will be working with stakeholders from across the state over the next 10 to 12 weeks to really give us feedback on what we need to change and what we need to do to better serve schools. They asked me, what do you really want out of this? And I said, well, the first thing I want is the ability to quit being so reactive. 99.9% of the days in our agency are spent reacting to what happens every day. We spend very little and have very little time to really plan for the future and to be proactive around our work. Their comment was, we can do that, but understand there'll be some things that you'll have to give up. You're doing things that maybe you don't need to be doing, and that's probably true. We hope then that we'll be able to develop a clear communication plan that will develop around our core mission in educational policy, educational leadership, Ms. Sandy, Dr. Sandy, and school improvement, an area that we struggle with. So lesson 3, don't take things personally. Now, I'm very passionate about children and their education, and sometimes I get a little frank and honest. And sometimes I've caught myself taking things personally. Though I'm not as detached as I need to be, I've come a really long way in this area. Probably compared to where I was when I started in this job, I'm about like Buddha. There's really nothing like this job to teach you not to take things personally. A good example, the Department of Education, after about 6 months, had to make a very tough decision to shut down a school district. And we didn't have the 350 number to say, hey, that's what the law says. We discovered a school district with 380-something kids that were not teaching to the standards, didn't even have the 38 units, had graduated kids for the past 2 years without even having the required graduation units. Our standards team found that their choral music program was a karaoke machine that was turned on by the cafeteria manager. We shut the school down and split it into 6 different districts. Took those children and put them in schools that were performing. Well, to tell you the truth, those people in that area don't like me very well. We went to inform them of our decision to do this in a public setting of a gymnasium in that little community, and about 400 people showed up. And I stood at a podium with a microphone, and they had 2 podiums out there, and hour after hour they told me how bad a person I was. I answered questions, and the 6 state policemen that were with me, the corporal finally walked up. This is the honest truth. He walked up there and he said, sir, I think it's probably time. Nothing you can tell them is going to change their mind, and the next person that gets up there is probably going to say, let's find a tree and get a rope. So they led me out the door and we took off. But the funny story, as I read the blogs that were sent to me and emails, hundreds of emails sent to me talking about how bad a person I was, and I didn't understand rural Arkansas, and then one lady said, I understand you're from a rural town not far from here. You've left your roots, and et cetera, et cetera. I did take it personally. Probably the one I took most personally was at the state board meeting when we actually went through the actual process of closing the school officially by the state board. they brought carloads of people and picketed out front of the state board, and they had very, very well-designed signs. These were not just cardboard signs they'd scribbled on. Somebody up there has a company that makes these plastic signs like you see in political signs. There was one that said, because the very first thing I said in that meeting is, I'm sorry that we're at this point. I'm sorry that your children have not had the kind of education that they deserve. The sign said, Kimbrell says he's sorry. And at the bottom it said, he is. So I've learned not to take things quite as personal, but yet it still does hurt. The problem, I think, is you only get past that point of personalizing those kinds of things when you really understand that what you're doing and the decisions that you make will have positive impact for children. I can tell you subsequently I've had emails, note cards, and even a personal visit from a parent who said, we didn't know what we didn't know. We didn't know that there were opportunities for our children that we're receiving at X school district now. Forgive us for the bad comments. Forgive us for the things that were said. That helps. But what really helps is understanding that there is a bigger yes at the end of those decisions. And as Eleanor Roosevelt said, no one can make you feel inferior without your permission. So, in that same vein, Phyllis Stewart, the lady who takes care of me, makes sure that I don't get into trouble, and make sure that I knew that I had to get up and travel this morning down here, taught me the SW rule, as she calls it. She says, some will, some won't. So what? Someone else waiting. Now, I said, Phyllis, what do you mean by that? She said, well, understand, some people are going to love the decisions that you make. Some people will just say, I don't like that so much. So what? Someone out there, someone needs your gift. So you move on. Because who you become in your journey of your work is a whole lot more meaningful than what happens to you as a person. So shaking some of that personal attacks has become a little bit easier. Some people would say you become crass. Maybe that's true. Lesson 4. And I thought I had this one down pat. So I ran this one by the staff. Lesson 4. Delegate, delegate, delegate. I thought I was a great delegator. And they said, no, you're not very good at it. I really, I guess, had a hard time with this one. And it may be, after talking with some of the staff, it may be that I did try to delegate in the first of this job, but I was so disappointed in some of the results when things didn't get carried out and things didn't happen, that I decided that I had to do it, and I really did spread myself pretty thin. So I've really learned the importance of delegating those tasks and those responsibilities, especially in those areas that I'm really weak in. And there are a lot of them. So I've got some really, really good people now who help me compensate for those weaknesses. And it's freed me up to focus on some things that I enjoy doing and really require my attention. Again, the only way to get there is to have the right team in place and the ability to trust those people to do the work so that you can focus on the big picture. And as I say, be able to look from that 30,000-foot view. Lesson 5. Probably the one that we all need to continue to focus and learn from is keep students at the center when you make a decision. The other day we were sitting in a group of superintendents. I have an advisory group of superintendents that come in every quarter. And we had about 27 of them sitting around a table, and we were talking about our legislative package from the Department of Education. We had one little bill that I thought wasn't going to make a big difference. To them it made a big difference. And a superintendent in Jonesboro, Arkansas said, Tom, let me just remind you of this. If we agreed to do this and allow the Department of Education, it was allowing us a few more days in this Act 1599 where school board members' family are hired. If we allow that, and we have to hold up the hiring of teachers for kids because of it, is that what's best for kids? Well, it wasn't. So we're going to revamp what we do and stay with what we need to ensure that when a school needs to hire a teacher, we are going to make that happen for those schools, because ultimately it's going to impact kids. So we have to make sure that what we do when we make decisions is focused solely on what's best for kids. And as Benny Gooden has said, Kimbrell, you write rules, you enact legislation to make things hard. And I'm going to tell you, that's one of the areas that just frustrates the hell out of me. And coming into this job, I thought, I'm going to simplify all this. If I don't like it, we're just going to do it what's best for kids. And as I began to look and ask questions, I understand now. There are some things that you can't just do. Denise, we found that out on the AYP. Why can't we do this? Well, the feds say you can't. Well, what? I've adopted a philosophy now. Okay, if we have a rule that says that, I want to see it in black and white. If the feds have a rule that says we can't or can't do that, I want to see it in black and white. If I see it in reading and writing, as Benny says, then we have to do what we have to do unless I can find a way around it. Again, we have to do what's best for kids. But if we can find a way to make it best for kids and get around what we have to get around, we'll do that. Jim Boardman's probably taught me more about that than anyone. I'll never jeopardize the state's ability to defend our action, but when I can, I'm going to always try to err on the side of students. I did that as a principal, as a teacher, and as a superintendent. We're going to continue to try to make those decisions at the state level. Now, I never get to talk to a group where I don't probably step on toes sometimes. And because as I look out there, I guess all I see is a retired superintendent, a lame duck superintendent, a has-been a current co-op director. So I didn't have to step on any superintendent's toes per se today. But you know, in Arkansas, as well as the rest of the country, we're just mired up in this irrelevant debate about educational reform. I mean, sitting where I'm sitting, I see advocates for charter schools in one corner, advocates for teachers' unions in one corner, and they're pulling everything they can pull in opposite directions. And all we're doing is tying up the educational system. As commissioner, I've learned that if we stop and say what's best for kids, we won't go wrong. Now, sometimes that means that we've supported the opening of charter schools. It means sometimes we've supported and closed charter schools. It has meant that we've closed traditional schools. Sometimes it means that we don't agree with the administrators and the teachers union, and sometimes it means all of us have joined hands and made things happen. But when we sit down and focus, Jerry, on what's best for kids, and we all put aside our adult issues, the decisions will not be wrong. But we're debating things that are adult in nature and concerned about adults. We need to be debating about what's best for kids. Lesson 6. Build strong relationships with people who care by communicating regularly. If there is one criticism that I hear constantly from Phyllis and others in my work, it's that I don't communicate clearly. And I don't spend the time that I need to spend with those people most important that know that they care about the work that we're doing, and they care about me as a person, and they care about me as a father. So a lesson that I've learned is set time aside to communicate regularly with the people around you. Talk about the things that are going right and the things that are going wrong. When you don't, there are misunderstandings, and that's when tension builds. And I'll take that back to the other one. One of the problems that we have in this debate about reform is that we talk across the fence, and we don't get in the same room and talk. When we do, we've seen remarkable things happen, and we can make that happen. But I've learned the lesson that you must communicate regularly. It's not any different than exercising. It's best done on a routine basis, because if you do it in large quantities only sporadically, you get real sore. Lesson 7, probably the hardest lesson for me to learn, and the last one that I'll talk about today. There's lots of others. Not all school leaders are school leaders. When I began my work at the association, I had this Pollyannic view that all school leaders were as passionate and as driven as I were about educating kids and about the people that I ran with. We have a tendency to run with people with the same passion and the desire. So I had surrounded myself with people and colleagues, a couple of them in this room, who really cared about kids. And they cared about improving schools. The problem is I've spent my entire life in this work. I don't remember not being involved in education. Growing up as the superintendent's kid, that's all we knew. 3 uncles that were superintendents, 2 uncles that were principals, and 8 aunts that were teachers. So I have lived this all my life. So being able to see from the outside, it's never been an option for me. But I've begun to realize that that association level, and Debbie, you'll have to agree with me. You may not want to. Not all of our school leaders are school leaders. Many of them view this work as a job and not as a mission. Since I came into this job and have an even different view, I've become even more disheartened. Some of our schools and districts lack dedicated, passionate, hard-working leaders. Their goals are not centered on improving opportunities for children, but are more focused on creating and maintaining a title for themselves or just making it to retirement. And in many cases, I found some of them just don't know what they don't know. And we've never taken the time to teach. Tough lesson to learn, and a difficult lesson in this position to realize that with 239 school districts and 18 open enrollment charters, that we have leaders that are not school leaders. So let me conclude and tell you that I've learned to accept people as they are, not as what I'd like for them to be, and to surround myself with those who can contribute to the work. I've learned that it's important to understand the history of an organization, but it's not good to dwell and live in it. Y'all get that one? That one really means a lot to me. We can't keep doing what we've been doing because it's what we've been doing. I've learned not to take those closest to me for granted. I've also learned to listen, to really listen to what they're saying and appreciate the qualities that they bring for the work that we're doing. I've also learned that sometimes you have to trust others even if there is a great risk. I really don't think that any of us can be successful if we always are on our guard and suspicious of what's going on around us. If you can't trust, you need to move on. I've also learned that not all children in our state are as lucky as I was, or as lucky as those in the Fayetteville School District, and the Springdale School District, and the Farmington School District, and I can name literally 50 around here, because I get to travel the whole state, to have a strong, caring, driven leader in their schools. And I've learned as a leader, you have to have the ability to do without constant approval and recognition from others. Because the important factors and focus is collaboration for the results that you want and need by keeping children at the center of the work. So those are my lessons, and I know there are many more to come. So maybe in a year or 2 more down the road, I'll have some new lessons to share with you. But at this point, those are my lessons that I've learned. I hope that, again, they may help you in your role. I know that they've helped me to have to reflect on my work over the last year and a half, so that the next year and a half will be more productive. I'd like to stop there and open it up for any questions, and it's wide open. You can ask me anything about what I talked about, or you can ask me anything about what we're doing with Common Core, or what we're doing with the assessment coordination, consortium that we're in. Or if you want to, I really want to talk to a group about my Finland trip. I ain't got to do that yet. Let me open it up. No, I don't. Any questions? Gary.
So I'd like some of your brief thoughts on the current legislative session. Are you hopeful that they'll do anything to make your job of improving opportunities for kids easier? And are you worried that they'll might engage in some mischief that'll make your job harder.
B. You know,
It's only a multiple choice question.
B. Yeah, it is as you know, almost half the House of Representatives is new. So there's a huge learning curve for many of those members. Most of those members are not coming from anywhere in relationship to understanding education. Most of them are coming from a very diverse background. And so there's a huge curve for them to learn the whole process. We're real concerned about maintaining adequacy and not getting back in court. You know, that is a huge issue. I still say it's not a matter of if we'll ever be sued, it's just when. Of course, we've already been sued by Deer Mount Judy, so I guess that's off the table. But there's still some concern there. I don't think, Gary, that it'd be a Pollyannic attitude to believe that they're going to go in there and make my life easier. I don't think that in this world that we live in today, where our country and our state wants to have more control over schools, they really do. That's where they want to go. When in reality, we need to be going in the other direction. In my opinion, I'll sneak in the Finland thing. Study Finland. All of the decisions are made at the school level by a board elected of 5 parents, elected by the parents, 1 teacher, and a student at the secondary schools. Interesting phenomenon. Decisions are at the local level. A great acceptance of trust. That's what we kept finding. So there's no trust that the schools are going to do, but it's hard. I just talked about the fact that we have leaders that aren't leaders. Yeah, it's going to be an interesting session. I am concerned. Yes, sir.
First, let me thank you very much for coming. My name is Bill McComas. I'm a professor of science education here. We're delighted that you're here. I've got 12 questions. I'll ask one at a time so others can get in. My first question has to do with the sort of sobering news that we got recently regarding science and Navy. But the positive spin on that is that a couple of years ago, the legislature was at least interested in this proposal to have an elementary science specialist in every elementary school. I'm very excited about that. We were so excited about it that we hired Kathy Wisser as our new assistant professor of elementary science education. So we're hoping to put her to work in that regard. What can you tell us about science specialists in elementary schools?
Well, one of the problems that we have is that these things cost money. We're in a time where money is probably the single biggest factor. What I think the problem is not an excuse, it's the reality, the focus on educating today's children in the elementary school. I mean, if you look at it, we don't even require science to be taught until the 4th grade.
I was going to bring that up.
But yet and I'm not saying that physical education and the arts aren't important, but we require certain minutes to be taught in those areas, yet and I'm a science teacher, so I have a real hard time with the science not being taught. It's being left up to the schools themselves whether they have the opportunity at this point to hire science specialists in their schools. We have put all the science specialists into the STEM centers that we can afford. The co-ops continue their science specialists. We're at the bare minimum of being able to fund that. I don't see that expanding in this economic times. I'd love to see it. I'd love to see us begin. And as a matter of fact, I had a phone conversation with one of our state board members today on the way up here about science. And her concern is we've seen some legislation mandate certain curriculum areas be taught. Some have been left out. And that conversation came because of an Arkansas history bill that's been filed, where we're going to carve time out of the school day to ensure that a certain amount of time is taught in Arkansas history. I love Arkansas history, but we're carving up the school day. Instead of saying this is what we want kids to know and be able to do about Arkansas history, here's what we know kids need to know and be able to do in science, and then we assess that and let schools decide how they're going to approach that instruction. We're a long way from that. But I think we've got to do more, not only with science, but math in the elementary schools. And not in the area of science, but our governor has a huge interest in math. Any math people in here? We're working on a proposal to create elementary endorsed math teachers, where elementary teachers will get an endorsement through some of the colleges and universities, And the governor's looking at some way to fund putting those also into the elementary schools through the local districts. But now, at this point, it's now going to be the local district's responsibility. The state doesn't have any money. But that's one of the things that we're actually writing into our NSLA money, to allow a school district to use NSLA money to hire these math-endorsed teachers at the elementary level. The governor just has this real hang-up with math in the elementary schools, and I understand that. You know? Yes, sir. I think in the back in the flat.
Dennis Beck, Educational Technology. What is your vision for the future of virtual education in Arkansas, and what steps are you taking to do that?
One of the things that I believe is that there is such a huge need in a rural state like Arkansas to be able to create and expand upon our ability to blend education with what can be delivered virtually now. Not just the CIV type of curriculum offerings, but the web-based curriculum offerings that we're seeing in the virtual charter school, that we're seeing in some of the other states. We think that this may be an option for some of our most rural districts, and looking at how that possibly could be leveraged, and kids that are 45 miles away could possibly have a lot of their curriculum delivered that way, and then give waivers and get rid of some of these standards of seat time that we have, and allow 1 day a week or 2 days a week for them to receive instruction at the campus, and then 3 days there. I think we have to expand that. We have to make those opportunities available. As I told somebody today, you know what the biggest high school in America is? What is it, Jay?
Virtual charter in Florida.
The virtual charter school in Florida is the largest high school in the nation. Y'all know what the largest college is Phoenix. So, you know, we're fighting against what we know the future is. Let's use that technology to help grow what we do in public schools to make sure that every child has an opportunity for a quality education. We've got a lot of work on in the bandwidth and accessibility issue, though. Again, we've got a rural state. Matter of fact, I got a letter from I believe he's a doctoral student here, who is from the Marshall area, Marshall, Arkansas area, who they can't get Windstream to create opportunities for their citizens to have broadband accessibility, and he asked me to make them do it. Well, I wish I could do that. But that accessibility for students is an issue we have to address. We've got the issue of bandwidth within our own DIS system that we're having to address for schools. But I see the availability of virtual blending with what we're doing currently and expanding so that we can make sure that kids get what they need. Again, sometimes we try to create too much in yesterday's world and not enough in tomorrow's.
Do you see Florida or Michigan as a model?
There are some things in Florida that we're looking at that Jim Boardman is taking a look at with one of his grants, that we're modeling some things that we possibly could do. Haven't looked at what they're doing in Michigan, but I appreciate that. I'll ask Jim to take a look at that. Yes, sir.
First off, I want to thank you for a really good speech. Beforehand, Bob Moranto.
Yes, Bob.
I talked to some of you beforehand, Josh, and other politicians, but
I've never been called a politician. I've been called a lot of other things.
Now I gotta pick one. I spend a lot of time, as you do, talking to principals and superintendents on traditional public schools and charter schools. And one thing we all agree on is the last 8 or 9 years, the number of things the state monitors at the school level has gone up from about 90 to 160 or so.
That's exactly right.
These last summer, 60-some schools were on probation. A lot of them kind of civil rules violations. So we're arguing with police and helping our kids. Has there been any thought to getting together sort of reinventing commission, get some school leaders, get some other folks, and try to figure out how we can streamline the process so we can make the jobs a little easier? And if you do, one guy you ought to have on is Skip Rutherford. The Clinton administration did this back in the 90s. Maybe you're an old part of this. Back when I was in government, they saved over $100 billion. It no longer took 5 years to order software. It's a true story. I think there's a lot of low-hanging fruit there that would be real helpful.
The piece that you wrote a couple of months ago?
Yeah.
Got me thinking, and I've already had this conversation in a work session with the state board. We've not, as you said, we've not even looked at the standards for accreditation since 1983.
Wow.
Now think about that. I want us to think about 1983. I was on this campus. I'm only 30. No, I'm 50. Hold it. That's a long time ago. And we've not taken a comprehensive look at the standards. And when we look at that list and we say they're on probation for this, or probation for not giving grades in PE, what are we doing? Why are we? Now, a lot of it's being pushed by, again, that control factor that legislators and others want to put on schools. So that is exactly what we're talking about with the state board. How are we going to progress? And the governor said, let's get through this session, and then, Kimbrell, let's talk about how we're going to do that. But my plan is, because I feel like I've got at least 4 years with this governor, is to attach ourselves to what we need to do from a standards perspective of what we expect schools to do and what we monitor in schools. As I said, we need to get away from day-to-day types of things and let schools be schools, and then let's talk about what you produce. Let's look at the outcomes instead of the inputs. So I appreciate that. I mean, I've still got that in my desk. Yes, sir, in the back, striped shirt, and then I'll come to you.
Jeff Dean, I'm a first-year doctoral student in education policy and a research assistant for Dr. Ritter. Got a couple questions.
Poor guy.
Quality.
Okay.
You said you read quality counts on your way back. I guess it was from Finland.
Yes.
Two things that really stood out there were when you looked at student achievement on the NAEP, math and reading. We've made great progress on
For a while.
NAEP and math. They're ranked as something like 5th or 7th in the country, but literacy was pretty flat. Over, I think it was 2003 and 2009. So I'd like your take on that and why we've seen such differences in those two subjects. And also, one common concern or criticism about these rankings was our ranking on school spending. That ranking is low and it has come down further in recent years. So, any thoughts you have on both of those?
First part, what we've come to find out in some work with actually here at the University of Arkansas in looking at what we're doing with our literacy assessment, we're not sure that our literacy assessment is actually doing what we need it to do. In other words, we're not sure that, and I've got to do more research on this before, I'm going to say anything to the point where I think we have to completely change that. But we think that there may be some things that aren't happening in that assessment tied to our standards that we need to look at. Because we know that there's a lot of good work going on in the classroom. We know that our literacy specialists in the co-ops and in the schools are doing phenomenal things with instruction and modeling, and our teachers are frustrated because they're doing everything they can. They know what the standards are, but we may not be assessing in the way we need to be assessing. So we're going to start the process of looking at that with our testing instrument now. So we think there's a disconnect there. So it may be the instrument that we're using that is saying you're not doing a good job assessing what actually is being learned in the classroom. The second part about the finance part, that's the part that blew me away. Because it didn't just look at and wasn't just focused on how much money was spent per student, but it was also focused on the effort of the state to do that. And as we know, our state, and it may be one of the reasons our state is in the economic condition that it is, and not broke, but giving more money, is that we've seen other states who have gone out there and gone out there and gone out there, and then all of a sudden now they're having to pull back and cut millions and billions of dollars from theirs. Ours has been such a small progression of additional resources on the scale of the entire budget. They also looked at what percentage of the state's budget went to education, and it is good, but what we know from the practical side is it's not what it used to be. And the reason it's not is because of this issue of the local property taxes and the area that we have there. We're seeing a larger percentage of the total cost being borne by the property owners versus the state. That's been very different from 15 years ago.
One more question.
I can't ask my other 11?
No.
You can do it in a minute.
Send them to the commissioner email.
Yes, sir.
I'm Mike McShannon, a graduate student in education policy.
Hey, Mike.
Maybe just because it sounds like you enjoyed talking about Finland, it'll allow you to do more of a kind of a question two-part. What are some maybe concrete steps that we in the state of Arkansas can take to be more like Finland? And the second part of that is, what's preventing us from being able to take those steps?
Eat more fish.
They do eat a lot of fish. They also eat reindeer. They eat reindeer?
Well, that'll go over well.
One concrete step that we can make is to ensure the quality of people coming into our teaching ed programs are of a higher quality. The University of Helsinki had 1,300 applicants and only 100 slots. 13 applicants and they accepted 100. Yet the reason is because teaching in Finland is seen as a very noble profession. When we walked into restaurants with principals, the principal was treated like the governor in that town. I mean, you know, if the governor walked in here, what would y'all do? Y'all all stand up and applaud, wouldn't you? Most of you. I would. When we walked into a restaurant, that's the way they were treated. They don't make any more money than our principals. Their teachers don't make any more. But when you talk to the cashier at the quick shop type thing, where I had to buy toothpaste and a razor because my luggage was 3 days late, they could talk English like they were from Chicago. That's not saying Chicagoans have accents. They just don't talk like us from Arkansas. I asked those questions. What do you think about teachers? Oh, teachers are the most wonderful people. I wish I could have been a teacher. Well, we don't entice or encourage our best and brightest. My parents, as I told y'all that story, and the reason it was hard for me to call is because my mom and dad did not want me to be an educator. They begged me not to be an educator. We're not encouraging our best and brightest. That's a concrete step that we can make. Some of the hurdles that we have is this culture that we created around distrust. That's a hard one to change. Thank y'all again.
You don't ever need to apologize again for your ability to speak. I think this group can attest to that. And I will have to say, of the speakers that I invited to give a commencement address to this college graduation, he did by far the best job, and it was a pretty good group of competitors. So we're delighted that you're here, and we're even more delighted that you're the Commissioner of Education, and we wish you well and give our regards to the Governor. One quick announcement. The next lecture is